The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
When the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them, a scholar of the law, tested him by asking, "Teacher, which commandment in the law is the greatest?" He said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the greatest and the first commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The whole law and the prophets depend on these two commandments." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
Many years ago, I read a story about a man who invited his boss to come home and have supper for the first time with he and his family, and he had very small children. And all the children had a job to do in the kitchen and preparing and setting the table. And so they put the boss at the very head of the table. And they said the prayer and they started the meal. And suddenly the father of the family realized that at the head of the table where his boss was sitting, his little boy had not put any silverware. And he said, "Johnny," he said, "why didn't you put silverware everywhere else? Why didn't you put silverware at the head of the table where Mr. Jones is sitting?" And the innocent little boy said, "Well, I didn't think he'd need any. You said he eats like a pig." You know, I think most parents at some time in their life have wished their children had not repeated exactly what they said. Every Jewish child in the time of Jesus, by the time they were 6 years old, had memorized the Shema. Deuteronomy 6, chapter 8. Very famous. Shema means hear, O Israel. Shema, O Israel. The Lord is God, the Lord alone. You shall love the Lord your God with all your mind and all your heart and all your soul. And the Shema was memorized by every Jewish, and the Pharisees would take and write it on a scroll and roll it up and put it in their leather phylacteries, which they tied around their head and on their left arm. And every time they would go to prayer, they were reminded of the most essential teachings of Judaism. The Lord is God, the Lord alone. There's no other. Love Him with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul. And so the Herodians had just been put in their places, we just read in last week's gospel, as they tried to trick Jesus. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. So now they're very cautious. They're trying to be very careful. But they send another scholar of the law to test Jesus. And this time the scholar says to him, "Which is the greatest of the commandments?" And Jesus says, "Ask your 6-year-old. You come trying to test me. Your 6-year-old knows the answer to this question. Love the Lord your God with all your mind and all your heart and all your soul." And then he quotes Deuteronomy 19:18. He says the second commandment is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. Many years ago when I was a senior in high school, something happened that I'll never forget. It was the last day of my high school career. It was the last day of final exams of my senior year in high school. And we were sitting there kind of looking through our notes for our last final exam, and the bell rang. And as the bell rang, the door opened and a girl walked in, and her name was Renee. And she was a very sweet girl, and she was a very beautiful girl. But Renee walked in, and as soon as everybody turned and looked as she walked in, and everyone knew exactly what had happened the moment we saw her, because she was always very pretty and she was always made up, her hair and her everything. She was just a very pretty girl. But clearly, she had stayed up late at night studying for her exams. She had overslept. She had not had a chance to take a shower and do her hair. And as soon as she comes walking in, she had a baseball cap on. And one of the boys, it was one of the cruelest things I've ever seen, in the front row, in front of the whole class, he said, "Dang, Renee, you look like a witch today." And if you could see the hurt in her eyes, the pain, it was like a sword that went through her soul. How important it is as a young girl to be pretty and to be to be realized that you're pretty, and for her to walk in already and then for him to say that. And do you know that another boy in the class, I'm sitting in the back, I'm watching this, another boy in the class stands up, and in front of the whole class he walks over to her and he says, "Renee, you are always beautiful to me." And he hugged her. And I watched the healing go back. And I sat at the back of the room and I said, how can we human beings be capable of so much cruelty and so much kindness? And the answer is Jesus. Jesus teaches us to be kind, to love, to care about other people. And as I thought about that story years later, it wasn't malicious envy. Malicious cruelty. That boy didn't wake up that morning and say, "Oh, I can't wait to go and do something cruel to Renee." It was just thoughtless cruelty. Charity makes us think of others and be aware of others and care about others. Charity makes us like Christ. Jesus gives us that grace to obey these two great commandments. St. Augustine, says, love God and do whatever you want. Remember here when he said that? I thought when I first heard that, I said, maybe this is a loophole. But of course, as you think about it, why did he say that? Because by being conscious of the two greatest commandments, the other 10 commandments are put into proper perspective, aren't they? We begin to realize that all the commandments are meant. Once again, St. Augustine writes, he says, God had to write the commandments on tablets of stone because we could no longer read them in our stony hearts. Do you know what I mean? The law is written here. It's in our heart. But original sin has hardened our hearts. So we don't see the truth, and it's not easy to always do what's right and good, or to do the kind thing, is it? Because of original sin. Our hearts have, that's why he gave us the 10 commandments, to lead us to the 2 commandments, the greatest commandments of all. Because we don't need the 10 if we obey the 2. And if we really make our effort to live those 2. St. John Chrysostom says that it is easier to love the God we cannot see than the neighbor we can. Boy, that's true, isn't it? Trying to love God with all our heart and soul, but he's so infinitely lovable. He's the good and the true and the beautiful. He's infinite goodness, infinite truth, infinite beautiful. So yeah, God's easier to love, but that neighbor who drives us crazy, boy, that's a saint maker, isn't it? And so God, when we say, Jesus, I want to be holy, guess what he does? He sends us a saint maker. It's not a compliment to be a saint maker. St. Benedict wrote somewhere in his law, St. Benedict in his rule for monks, he said, and I paraphrase a little, he says, if you do not have a monk in your monastery who prays the divine office twice as fast as everybody else, or twice as slow, and always comes up and says the wrong thing at the wrong moment in the wrong way, he says, if you do not have a monk in your monastery like this, write to another monastery and ask them to send you one of theirs. Why? Because saint makers make saints. We learn to be patient and kind by dealing with people with whom it's hard to be patient and kind. St. John Chrysostom says famously, you love God only as much as you love your least favorite neighbor. Ouch. Think about your least favorite neighbor. He says you only love God as much as you love him or her. That person you really have a hard time with. Boy, that makes you think, doesn't it? What is a saint? One definition I like is someone who lives the two greatest commandments heroically, extraordinarily well. They really love God with all their heart, soul, and mind, and they love their neighbor as themselves. And this is what the Lord is reminding all the saints in the world, St. Francis Xavier, St. Therese, St. Damien of Malus, Mother Teresa, St. Mother Teresa of Calcutta, were so other-centered, weren't they? They're always thinking about God, about pleasing Jesus, and about serving others. I remember a person once said to me, Father, I'm just a plain Jane Catholic. She said, I'm married, I'm trying to bring up my children to follow Jesus, but I'm no pope and I'm no famous priest or sister, so I can't really be holy. She said, I'm not called to be a saint. I said, wrong. We are all called to become saints. And I think remaining patient with your children when you have corrected them 400 times today is heroic holiness. This is the love Jesus is talking about. This is the martyrdom of 1,000 pinpricks. Love is doing our vocational duty, loving the person in front of us and around us, and loving the Lord with all our hearts. Love always wins. Love is stronger than hate. It's stronger than sin. Love is stronger than Satan. And love is stronger than death. Love will, just as the love of Jesus brought his resurrection, the love of Jesus will bring your body to resurrection as well. So please don't just say, oh yeah, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Oh yeah, I've heard that one before. I've got that one. No, we don't have that one. It's always good to go back to the fundamentals. Do I really love the Lord my God with all my heart, all my soul, and all my strength, every moment of every day? No. And do I really love my neighbor as myself all the time? No. And that is why Christianity is hard. Jesus asks us hard things, doesn't he? And yet, what a great way to live our lives. I want to close by quoting from Dr. Peter Kreeft, this book, Ask Peter Kreeft. He's a great Catholic philosopher. And his question that I'm going to answer in just a few little lines, he says, the question of this chapter is, why are so many philosophers weird? That's the question. Here's his answer. He says, about 90% of all people who have ever lived have had children. Only 10% of famous philosophers have had children. He said, children are our most effective educators. They keep us sane. They do this by driving us insane. If you don't have somebody whom you love so much that he almost drives you insane, it's very hard to be sane. Nothing makes us more unselfish and wholehearted more quickly than having children. Children teach you by existing. They demand your time, your love, your advice, your rules, your attention, your money, your mind, and your body. They need you. The most common reason that people return to the Catholic Church is children. Like parachute jumpers and soldiers in foxholes, parents know they need God. And for similar reasons. Amen.